been able to shoot you if you'd have seen him!
If you close your eyes and think of Brandon De Wilde, you probably hear a little boy's voice before you see his face. A dusty frontier town, a rider disappearing into the distance. And that line, thin and trembling but unforgettable, "Shane, come back." For most of America, Brandon froze there forever, and one-year-old, with tear-filled eyes and a cracked heart. But the real Brandon didn't stay in that field. He grew up, he fell in love, he made mistakes, he chased music, he kept secrets, and he died young, with more questions around him than answers. This is the story of the boy who tried to become a man in an industry that only wanted him to stay small, and of the whispers that followed him all the way to his grave. Brandon De Wilde was born Andre. Brandon De Wilde on April 9th, 1942, in Brooklyn, New York, into a family where the theater wasn't just a dream, it was the family business. His father, Fritz De Wilde, was an actor and Broadway production stage manager. His mother, Eugenia, acted part-time. Lines, costumes, stagehands, late-night rehearsals, that was Brandon's childhood. While other kids were learning to ride bikes, he was learning to hit his mark. The family later moved to Baldwin, Long Island, but the stage stayed with him. By 7, while most children were still learning multiplication tables, Brandon was standing under hot Broadway lights. His first big step came with Carson McCullers' play, The Member of the Wedding. He played John Henry West, a lonely, talkative little boy aching for connection. Audiences didn't just like him, they believed him. Brandon's performance was so natural, so raw, that critics called him a prodigy. He won the Donaldson Award, becoming the youngest actor ever to receive it. The play went to the screen in 1952, and Brandon went with it. His film performance earned him a Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer. Hollywood, always hungry for the next fresh face, had found its golden child. Then came Shane. In 1953, director George Stevens cast the one-year-old Brandon as Joey Starrett in what would become one of the greatest westerns ever made. Alan Ladd was the mysterious gunslinger. Van Heflin was the hard-working farmer. But it was Brandon, the wide-eyed boy caught between hero worship and fear, who gave the story its soul. That final scene with Joey crying out, "Shane, come back!" into a valley of echoes, carved itself into American film history. Brandon was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, one of the youngest ever considered. For a moment, it looked like he might have a straight, shining road ahead of him. Child star, then teen star, then leading man. But Hollywood almost never lets it be that simple. After Shane, the studios tried to package his charm for television. He starred in the ABC sitcom Jamie from 1953 to 1954, playing an orphaned boy taken in by his wealthy grandfather. On the surface, it was wholesome, family-friendly TV. Behind the scenes, it was a young actor being taught to hit marks, hit jokes, and hit ratings. Brandon did it all with grace. Guest spots on Wagon Train, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, The Virginian, and other shows followed. He was working constantly, growing up in front of the camera. But something stranger was happening too. The world still saw him as Joey, even as his voice dropped and his face sharpened into that of a young man. By the late 52s, Brandon wanted more than just to be the boy from Shane. In 1959, he took on Blue Denim, playing a teenager dealing with pregnancy, shame, and adult choices. It wasn't the safe frontier anymore. It was the messy, modern world. In 1962's All Fall Down, he played Warren Beatty's younger brother, sensitive, wounded, looking for a moral compass in a world that didn't seem to have one. And then came HUD in 1963. On paper, HUD was Paul Newman's picture, a black-and-white modern Western about a selfish, hard-drinking anti-hero. But Brandon's role as Lonnie Bannon, the decent, conflicted nephew who loves HUD and recoils from him at the same time, was the movie's conscience. Watching him share the frame with Newman, you can feel something electric and uneasy. A boy-turned-man looking at the future he might want, and the darkness it might require. On screen, it's a moral struggle. Off screen, there was another struggle brewing, one Brandon never fully spoke about. Because somewhere between the prairies of Shane and the dust-blown ranch of Hud, the lines between admiration, mentorship, and desire began to blur. In early 60 Seconds Hollywood, image was survival. Studios crafted every gesture, every romance, every public smile. Paul Newman was the new king of cool, blue-eyed, casually rebellious, dangerously charming. Brandon admired him deeply, his craft, his control, the ease with which he seemed to navigate a world that had never quite felt solid under Brandon's feet. People on set noticed the way Brandon watched Newman. He asked him about acting, about marriage, about balancing art and fame. The questions weren't just technical, they were personal, almost searching. Over the years, a fragile web of rumors formed half-remembered conversations. Secondhand stories whispered at industry parties, suggestions scribbled into old letters and interviews. Some claimed that during the making of Hud, Brandon invited Newman to his bungalow one night under the pretense of a casual get-together. A guitar, a bottle, a long conversation about loneliness and masks. Some claimed Brandon let his hand linger on Paul's a second too long, searched his eyes for something more than professional approval. Others insisted nothing so explicit ever happened, that it was all subtext, all in the way Brandon leaned a little closer, laughed a little softer, looked at Newman like he was both a role model and a forbidden star. What's true and what's legend? No one can say with certainty. Paul Newman never spoke publicly of any such moment. Brandon died before he could tell his side. What remains are shadows, feelings, and the sense that in a town full of manufactured love stories, this might have been a real one that never had a chance to begin. Whether you believe the seduction rumors or not, it's clear Brandon carried a complicated, intense admiration for Newman, part professional, part personal, all tangled up in an era that offered him no safe way to untangle it. And Newman wasn't the only one. While his personal life grew more complicated, his professional life began to drift. The Hollywood that had adored boyish innocence in the 50 seconds was giving way to a harsher, more cynical 70 seconds. The easy, open-faced sincerity Brandon brought to the screen was suddenly out of sync with a world embracing anti-heroes, violence, and grit. His film roles slowed. Television gigs came and went. He turned to theater, smaller houses, more intimate audiences, less glamour but more control. It was there, on stage, that he tried to rebuild himself not as a former child star, but as a serious adult actor. In those same years, he chased another dream, music. Friends remember nights with Brandon and musician Graham Parsons trading songs and stories, staying up too late, talking about life after Hollywood. Brandon recorded some tracks with Parsons' band, the International Submarine Band. They never broke through commercially, but the sessions mattered to him. Music was a way to speak without being scripted, to explore parts of himself that didn't fit neatly into a studio contract. Later, when Parsons co-wrote In My Hour of Darkness with Emmylou Harris, the first verse was widely believed to be about Brandon, a quiet, coded eulogy for a friend who crashed too early in more ways than one. In his personal life, Brandon tried to do what so many young actors do, build something normal in the middle of chaos. In 1963, at 21, he married writer Susan Maw. They had a son, Jesse. For a while, there were glimpses of simple happiness, family photos, small apartments filled with books and scripts and baby toys. Brandon adored his son, but the pressures of a fading career, the confusion inside him, and the strain of two young artists trying to grow in different directions proved too much. The marriage ended in 1969. They continued to co-parent, but something in Brandon shifted. He seemed to float, caught between who he had been and who he was trying to become. Then, in the early 70 seconds, he met Janice Jarrow, a former flight attendant and aspiring actress who, friends said, gave him a kind of calm he'd never really had. They married in April 1972. People around him noticed the difference. Brandon seemed more grounded, more hopeful. He had a stable relationship, a steady theater job, and ideas for the future that didn't revolve around recapturing what he'd lost, but building something new. He never got the chance. On July 6th, 1972, while starring in a stage production of Butterflies Are Free at Denver's historic Elitch Theater, Brandon was driving his camper van through the nearby suburb of Lakewood, Colorado. For reasons that would never be fully explained, fatigue, distraction, bad timing, the vehicle left the road, struck a guardrail, and slammed into a parked truck. The van rolled. Brandon was trapped inside. Emergency workers freed him and rushed him to St. Anthony Hospital. His injuries, a broken back, shattered leg, fractured neck, were catastrophic. At 7:20 p.m., he was pronounced dead. He was 30 years old. For fans, the news felt impossible. The boy calling, "Shane, come back," was gone. The young man standing beside Paul Newman in Hood, torn between moral lines, would never make another choice. The actor who had spent his life trying to step out of his own shadow had disappeared in an instant, leaving behind a son, a new wife of only 3 months, and parents who had watched him rise and fall under lights they had once dreamed of for him. He was first buried in Hollywood, the town that had made him and, in its own way, broken him. Later, his parents brought him back east, to Pinelawn Memorial Park on Long Island, a quieter place, closer to the home where he first learned to recite lines and believe in make-believe. The move was more than geography. It was a kind of reclamation. In death, Brandon belonged not to the studios, not to the tabloids, but to the family that had always loved the boy before the star. In the years since, Brandon De Wilde has become one of the most haunting figures in Hollywood history, frozen forever as a child on millions of screens, while the rest of his life fades into rumor, footnotes, and half-baked interviews. Was he a tragic, withdrawn soul, a restless artist, a man looking for love in all the wrong places, or simply a kid who grew up too fast? The answer is probably all of the above. If Brandon De Wilde's journey opened your eyes to a side of Hollywood, you rarely hear about the pressure of child stardom, the hidden desires, the unspoken connections. The way a life can be both privileged and painfully fragile. Take a moment to like this video. It helps this story reach other people who remember Shane, who love HUD, or who simply care about the forgotten faces behind old movie credits. Tell me in the comments what stayed with you. Your thoughts don't just fuel the algorithm, they help keep Brandon's full story alive, not just the parts Hollywood chose to remember. And if you love deep dives into the hidden histories of film icons, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. There are countless other stories like Brandon's, beautiful, messy, heartbreaking, and true in ways the studio biographies never dared to be. Because behind every iconic scene, behind every legendary name on a poster, there's a real person wrestling with secrets, with love, with fear, with hope. Those are the stories we're here to tell.